This is the firstborn of humanity. This is the first to bring an offering to God, the first to feel rejection. This is the first to take a life. This is Pantheon mythology, and this is Cain. If you too want to bring offerings, check out Pantheon Apparel, our clothing brand inspired by myths, folklore and legends. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. Cain is the first human born after the fall. Unlike Adam, who was formed from dust, or Eve, taken from Adam's side, Cain enters the world through pain, just as God said childbirth would now be. His name, Cain in Hebrew, likely comes from the root kana, meaning to acquire or to possess. When Eve gives birth, she says, "I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord." Some early interpretations suggest she believed this child would be the promised one, the seed who would crush the serpent and restore what was lost in Eden. That belief gives Cain's story an even darker edge. Cain becomes a tiller of the ground, not just any ground, cursed ground. In Genesis 3, God tells Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." Cain inherits that burden. He wrestles with soil that fights back, trying to force life out of what's been cursed. His younger brother Abel takes a different path. Abel becomes a shepherd. Where Cain breaks the earth, Abel tends living creatures. This isn't just a career split, it's a symbolic one. Cain represents human effort, self-sufficiency and control. Abel's life revolves around care, dependence and sacrifice. That contrast is deliberate. The writer of Genesis is setting the stage. Two brothers, two paths. One tied to the cursed earth, the other to the life God gave. One who works to produce, the other who watches over. It's not about what they do. It's about how they relate to God, to the world, and eventually to each other. At some point, both brothers bring an offering to God. The text doesn't explain why. There's no command or ritual, but something drives them to it. Maybe it was passed down from Adam and Eve. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, they each make an offering, and the difference between them is immediate. Cain brings produce from the ground. Abel brings the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. In other words, Abel gives the best. Cain simply gives some of what he has. God accepts Abel's offering. Cain's he rejects. According to Jewish tradition, such as in Midrash Rabbah, the problem was that Cain gave from inferior crops, flax or leftovers, while Abel gave the finest of his flock. In other words, the quality mattered. But Genesis 4:7 shifts the focus. God tells Cain, "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" The rejection wasn't about the item, it was about Cain himself, his intention, his attitude, his failure to approach God with the right heart. The New Testament sharpens that idea. Hebrews 11:4 says Abel's offering was made by faith. Cain's was not. This implies Abel trusted God, while Cain may have given out of obligation, resentment, or even pride. There's also the question of what they offered. Abel brings blood, something alive. Cain brings fruit from the soil, the same soil God cursed after the fall. In that light, Cain's offering could be seen as an attempt to honor God through cursed labor, through self-reliance rather than dependence. It may have been sincere effort, but it wasn't obedient faith. And so, God rejects it. To Cain, that rejection is more than disappointment. It's personal. His work has been dismissed, his status threatened, and something in him begins to unravel. Cain says nothing, but the change in him is visible. Genesis says, "His countenance fell." That phrase refers to more than a facial expression. It marks a shift in posture, in spirit. Cain is angry, but also dejected. The rejection has cut deep, and the humiliation festers. Then God steps in, not with judgment, but with a warning. Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. It's one of the most psychologically loaded statements in the Bible. Sin is described as a creature waiting just outside like a predator. This isn't poetic language. It's a direct confrontation. God recognizes that Cain is on the brink, and he puts the responsibility squarely on his shoulders. There's no coercion here. Cain hasn't sinned yet, but the impulse is there, and Cain is told plainly, you have the choice. The Hebrew phrase for crouching, rovetz, evokes the image of a wild animal laying in wait. Ancient Mesopotamian parallels even associate this wording with demonic figures lurking at thresholds. This is Cain's threshold. He's standing at the edge of something irreversible. The statement, its desire is for you, but you must master it, suggests a struggle of wills. Sin is described almost as a rival, one that wants to control, but can still be resisted. This is the first moment in the biblical text where the concept of moral accountability truly appears. Adam and Eve were tempted by an external force. Cain is being torn apart from within. And what's striking is that God doesn't intervene beyond this. He doesn't force Cain to stop. He doesn't remove the threat. He lays it out plainly and leaves Cain to decide. And Cain does decide. He hears the warning, he understands it, and he walks away from it anyway. Cain speaks again, but this time it is not to God, it is to Abel. Let us go out to the field. That is all we are told. There is no detail about the conversation, no witness, no emotion, just that line. And then, while they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. The Hebrew is devastating in its brevity. There is no weapon mentioned, no motive stated, just the act. He rose up against his brother and killed him. The first death in Scripture is not described with horror or drama, it is stripped bare, which only makes it worse. This is the first act of human violence, and it does not come from survival or war. It comes from a wounded ego, from jealousy, from a man who could not bear to be second. Cain does not lash out at God. He turns his rage onto the one who made him feel small. And then comes the question. God says, "Where is Abel, your brother?" It echoes what he asked Adam, "Where are you?" But here, it is not about hiding. It is about accountability. And Cain answers with one of the most haunting lines in the Bible. Am I my brother's keeper? It is flippant, sharp. Cain is not pleading, he is deflecting. In Hebrew, the word shomer, keeper, implies protection, responsibility, watchfulness. Cain throws that back at God, as if to say, that is your job, not mine. He knows exactly what he has done, but there is no remorse, no guilt, just a cold, calculated refusal to answer. And in the next verse, we are told that Abel's blood cries out from the ground. The soil that Cain worked now carries the voice of his victim, and God has heard it. God responds to the murder with a sentence. He says, "Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." The earth that Cain once worked will no longer serve him. His relationship with the land is broken. From this point forward, he will live in exile, cut off from the land, from his home, and from any sense of permanence. Cain speaks again. "My punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me away from the ground, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me." He does not mention Abel. He does not ask for forgiveness. He focuses entirely on his own suffering. The fear is clear. He has introduced blood into the world, and now he believes that blood will be repaid. God responds with protection. Scripture says, "Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him." The Hebrew word used is orth. It can refer to a sign, a symbol, a token, or a decree. The text does not describe it visually, but it may have been something visible, or it may have been a divine pronouncement that followed him wherever he went. Either way, the outcome is the same. Cain is under protection. Anyone who harms him will bring sevenfold vengeance upon themselves. This moment introduces a clear tension between justice and mercy. Cain has taken a life, yet his own is spared. He is sentenced to wander, to live under the weight of what he has done, but he is not destroyed. The justice lies in the curse. The mercy lies in the mark. Early Jewish commentary, including interpretations of the Talmud and Midrash, often described the mark as a supernatural sign of God's authority, a warning that Cain belonged to God, even in his guilt. Other traditions described it as a radiant mark on his forehead or a sign placed in his speech or appearance, though these are interpretive additions, not part of the biblical text. Over the centuries, the mark of Cain was twisted to serve destructive ideologies. During the 18th and 19th centuries, some groups in America and Europe falsely claimed that the mark referred to skin color and used it to justify racial slavery. Others misinterpreted Cain's wandering as a reflection of Jewish identity and used it to fuel anti-Semitic myths. None of these ideas appear in the Bible. They are later distortions shaped by cultural bias, not scripture. The mark given to Cain is not a racial identifier. It is not a sign of ethnicity or lineage. It is a warning. It is a statement that vengeance is not to be carried out by man. Cain carries guilt, but he also carries protection. He is no longer a farmer, no longer part of the settled world, but remains alive, marked by God and sentenced to roam, a living reminder of bloodshed, consequence, and restraint. Cain leaves the presence of God and settles in the land of Nod. The name Nod comes from the Hebrew root nud, meaning to wander. It is not described as a location with borders or cities. It is a condition, displacement, instability, exile. Yet the next verse introduces something unexpected. Cain builds a city. This raises an obvious question. How does a man condemned to wander build a city? Who is there to live in it? Genesis says he has a wife, but up to this point only Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel have been mentioned. There is no record of her origin, there is no list of the people who might have helped build or inhabit this city, and yet the city exists. Cain names it Enoch, after his son. There are two main primary explanations that have shaped theological discussion ever since. The first is that Adam and Eve had many other children, who are simply not named. Genesis 5:4 states that Adam had sons and daughters beyond Cain, Abel, and Seth. If this tradition is taken seriously, then Cain's wife may have been a sister or a niece, and the population of the early world expanded quickly through these unnamed descendants. This view maintains a closed system. Humanity descends entirely from Adam and Eve, and the biblical text offers only a focused summary rather than a complete genealogy. The second explanation is more controversial. This is the idea that other humans existed outside Eden. The view, often referred to as the pre-Adamic theory, suggests that Adam and Eve were a chosen pair placed in Eden, but not necessarily the only humans created. In this reading, Cain enters a world already populated to some degree, and the city he builds becomes a point of contact between the cursed line and the wider human world. Supporters of this theory often point to the vagueness of the early Genesis narrative, which focused on conventional history rather than exhaustive anthropology. Critics of the view argue that it conflicts with the theological position that Adam is the ancestor of all mankind, especially as reinforced in later scripture. Regardless of which explanation is followed, the text leaves the identity of Cain's wife and the people that might have settled in Enoch deliberately unclear. This silence has fueled centuries of debate, speculation, and interpretation. What is clear is this: Cain, though cursed, does not fade into obscurity. He creates, he fathers, he builds. The man who brought death into the world also becomes the founder of the first city. His legacy is not just written in blood, but also brick and stone. Cain's story continues through his descendants. Genesis lists his line in a brief but significant genealogy. It traces the rise of culture alongside the spread of violence. Cain's son Enoch is followed by Irad, then Mahujael, then Methushael, and then Lamech. With Lamech, the narrative shifts. Lamech takes 2 wives, Ada and Zillah, marking the first mention of polygamy in the Bible. Their children become innovators. From Ada comes Jabal, the father of those who live in tents and keep livestock. He pioneers the nomadic lifestyle and structured dwelling. His brother Jubal becomes the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe. He introduces music, creativity, and the roots of artistic tradition. Zillah gives birth to Tubal-Cain, a smith who works in bronze and iron. He ushers in metallurgy, forging tools, weapons, and the beginnings of technology. Zillah also bears a daughter, Naamah. The Bible gives no details about her, but later traditions, especially in mystical and folkloric texts, associate her with seduction, enchantment, and hidden knowledge. In some Jewish writings, she appears alongside figures tied to the demonic or arcane. Together, these descendants mark the birth of civilization: herding, music, metalwork, myth. Cain's line does not vanish, it reshapes the world. Then Lamech speaks. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Lamech's words carry no remorse. They are a declaration. He expands the vengeance once given to Cain and claims it for himself. The first murder ended in exile. Lamech responds to violence with violence and calls it strength. This becomes the true legacy of Cain: blood that leads to invention, but also escalation. Tools are forged, music is created, and cities rise. At the same time, violence is accepted, magnified, and even celebrated. Cain's story begins with soil and leads to steel. His descendants shape the world through brilliance and brutality. The first man born carries the first curse, and from his line comes a civilization built with both hands and blood. After the death of Abel and the exile of Cain, a new child is born to Adam and Eve. They name him Seth. Eve says, God has appointed me for another offspring instead of Abel. The Hebrew root, shat, means to place or set, suggesting stability, restoration, and continuity. Seth is not described as a replacement in spirit, but in line. Through him, the narrative shifts. Genesis records that Seth fathers Enosh, and it is during Enosh's time that people begin to call on the name of the Lord. This is the first indication of organized worship, turning back toward God. From Seth comes a different line, one that leads to Noah, to Shem, and eventually to Abraham. It is through this line that covenant, faith, and obedience begin to take shape. While Cain's descendants shape culture and magnify violence, Seth's line turns toward God. The Bible never draws this contrast directly, but the structure is deliberate. The story of Cain builds toward human achievement and vengeance. The line of Seth moves in the opposite direction, toward calling, covenant, and worship. These are the two paths placed before early humanity. One path seeks legacy through cities, tools, and dominance. The other seeks relationship, obedience, and promise. One ends in Lamech's violent song. The other leads to a man who will walk with God and build an ark. Seth's birth closes the chapter on Cain's immediate story, but it also opens a new path forward. From this moment on, Scripture will follow the line of faith. Cain's story does not end in Genesis. It echoes across theology, folklore, literature, and philosophy, each interpretation drawing out something different, something unresolved. In Gnostic texts, such as the Gospel of Judas or the writings of the Canaanites, Cain becomes something entirely unexpected. He is not seen as a villain, but as a figure of resistance. The Creator God in these texts is cast as a false or lesser deity, one who binds souls through law and judgment. Cain, by defying this God, is presented as a liberator. His violence becomes an act of rebellion against a cosmic tyrant. In this worldview, Cain stands for freedom, hidden knowledge, and divine spark trapped in flesh. In Islamic tradition, Cain appears as Qabil. After killing his brother Habil, he is unsure what to do with the body. Then he sees a crow scratch at the earth, burying another. Cain learns by watching. He mimics the act, laying Abel to rest. This moment adds a layer of shame, one rooted in helplessness and ignorance. The first burial in human history comes from imitation, not understanding. Christian theology places Cain as the antithesis of Christ. One takes life out of envy, the other gives life through sacrifice. Cain's actions lead to exile and bloodshed. Christ's lead to redemption. In this contrast, Cain represents fallen humanity, estranged from God, burdened by guilt, and ruled by pride. Across culture, Cain becomes the archetype of the outsider. He is cursed, marked, wandering, but still creating, still shaping. He appears in vampire lore as the first immortal killer, doomed to feed on others forever. In literature, he walks through gothic, horror, and existential tragedy. In games and comics, he emerges as a tragic anti-hero, a builder of worlds who can never rejoin them. Philosophically, Cain represents the human condition. He is guilt without resolution, choice without return. He kills, is confronted, and then left to live with what he has done. He carries consciousness, burden, and legacy. Cain tills cursed ground, not just with his hands, but with his memory. In every tradition, whether religious, mystical, or modern, Cain remains the same. He is the first to fall not by deception, but by decision. And ever since, humanity has been reckoning with what that decision means. Cain was never unmade. He walked into exile carrying the world's first curse, and the ground itself recoiled beneath his feet. He built cities, forged tools, fathered a civilization, and left behind a trail not of blood, but of influence. His story ends with no death, no closure, no grave, only a question. What happens to a man who cannot die, but is never forgiven? What becomes of a wanderer with no end? Some say the mark still burns, and Cain still walks.